Hello, everyone. This is Craig from NGP Van, and welcome to the webinar, Using NGP Van to Grow Supportive Relationships. We are going to get started in just a minute. It is just about 12. We'll maybe wait like 1 minute or 2 minutes for people to join. We have a bunch of participants joining the webinar now, so we'll give them a moment to do that. In the meantime, I will cover some housekeeping items. So let's jump into those. Yes. This session will in fact be recorded. A copy of the deck that we're using will be shared in a follow-up email. So when this webinar is over, we will share out probably a PDF copy of the deck or maybe the slides. We can figure that out, probably PDF. And we also like to take the video from the presentation, right? So this is being recorded and we take the video from the presentation, we add some closed captions for accessibility, and make sure that we have other information that might be shared here, included in links and things like that. So when that's all done, you will receive both a copy of the deck and also a link to the replay video, and that will be sent to you in a follow-up email. And also, we will probably put some semblance of this on the NGP Van blog, meaning, a link to the video and then just a summary of what we chat about here for those, I guess, who want the cliff notes of this amazing webinar, which would be a disservice, but we'll have it there along with the link. So you will have that. Real quick, related to asking questions. So we have a chat function in Zoom, and we also have the Q&A function in Zoom. So if you have a question about something that we are talking about or presenting in this webinar, please drop it in the Q&A. We like to have the Q&A be open just for questions, not, general chat and things like that. If you have a technical question, like I can't hear something or I can't do something or I don't even see the chat box, you could pop that in the chat and we'll figure it out. Overall and in general, the chat should be used for chat, for us to engage, talk about some of the topics. Feel free to engage with everyone, not just the hosts and panelists. Post anything that you want to say about what we're covering, your experience, things like that. We like to make these really engaging. And please do ask questions as we go along. I'll be in the Q&A, and both Alex and Sean will be ducking into the Q&A as we move along. So we will be answering those questions both in written form and also live if we get a question that applies, more broadly. So we'll do that. So please do drop it in the Q&A. And now, to start, please drop in the chat who you are, where you're from, like what city, and what organization you're with, just so we get a sense of, who's on, who we're working with here, things like that. And as we move along, just, drop notes there. I'm in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania myself, and I am now going to turn it over to our hosts, Alex and Sean. I'll let them go ahead and introduce themselves.
Sean, do you want to go first?
Sure. Hey, everyone. My name is Sean Hoy. I am a consultant and I'm a senior advisor at Nevada Democratic Victory. It's so great to be with you. I'm joining you live from Las Vegas, Nevada. Just a little bit of background about myself. I got my start in political campaigns now over a decade ago, working on Barack Obama's re-election campaign as an intern. I caught the bug, the bug for organizing and have been doing it ever since. Most recently, I led the coordinated campaign to re-elect Senator Cortez Masto here in Nevada to deliver the majority for Democrats in the United States Senate. A margin we won by was 8,000 votes, and excited to talk to you about how we did that in this presentation. We really leaned, as you can imagine, on based on the title of this presentation, we really leaned on our supporters to make that happen. So excited to talk to you about that. And I will kick it over to Alex.
Hi, I'm Alex. I come from a slightly different background as Sean, but still very related. I'm on the data side of things. So I got my start in 2014 working for Wendy Davis on the data team with Battleground Texas, then worked on the Hillary campaign and at the Florida Democratic Party and in 2018, and then for Elizabeth Warren in 2019 in Iowa, and then finished out the 2020 cycle with the Biden campaign as the Midwest Regional Analytics Director, where I worked with Sean on the Midwestern states. coming to you from the District of Columbia, where it is pretty hot and not fun. So hope everyone is in a location that is not as warm or humid as the District of Columbia is right now.
Yeah, we get like maybe 2 weeks of sun here in Pittsburgh. It's like July 3rd or 4th to, the 20th or so. Maybe we're even going past our normal 2 weeks of super sunny weather, although it hasn't been as hot as somewhere else, some other places in the country, which can be very tough, but it's nice. Okay, great. Well, let's roll. I'll let you, Sean and Alex, go ahead and take it away.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks so much, Craig. Really appreciate it. So we're really excited to talk to you about supporters. We really believe, as the title indicates, that supporters are the foundation of successful organizations, whether it's a campaign, whether it's a union, whether it is a C3 or C4 organization, that supporters are really critical to making what you need to get done happen. But you can't do that without data. You can't do that at scale without tracking your supporters and using that to leverage and grow your relationships with them. And so that's what we're really excited to talk to you about today. I think to get us started, we want to ask a question, just an open-ended question. Please just in the chat, drop a couple of lines. We'd like to ask you, how do supporters grow campaigns and organizations? So we'll give folks a couple of seconds to do that.
Yeah, just throw in the chat what you think, or what you're used to, or what you've done in the past that's been successful for you. Email, digital, knocking on doors, canvassing, just asking, over the phone, that kind of stuff. What have you done? Heidi says, by showing up.
Networking, showing up. Agree with all those things. Friend-to-friend texting. It's very popular and very on trend these days. House parties, networking on email, breaking down silos between volunteers and donors. That's really interesting. Thanks, Davis. As someone who believes in sharing small dollar donors between, the small dollar donors that you have are also your canvassers, they're also your phone bankers. So that's really great to hear. I think, the long and the short of it is that we agree with all these things, and we can use all of these different tactics to leverage and grow our organizations. And so we want to talk to you again about how we can use data to do that, right? So building strong relationships with supporters, we want to do that so we can elevate supporters up the ladder of engagement. And what do I mean by the ladder of engagement? Right? We believe that supporters, whether they are voters, whether they are constituents, first-time volunteers, start by taking, what we'd call like a low-level action. They cast a ballot for you. They are your, like I said, constituents in a district, or a constituent of your organization. Maybe for the first time, they take a low barrier action. Maybe they sign a petition online, or someone, contributes $15 to your campaign. We want to take all of those data points to turn them into regular volunteers and recurring donors. And we want to leverage those relationships and that data that we have on them to make them leaders of your campaign, people who are leading phone banks, people who are hosting fundraisers, people who are leading, parties to write letters to the editor, or letters to your local congressman. Whatever the outcome that you are trying to get people to do, we want to use data to grow people over time into doing those things. And so we're going to talk a little bit about how to do that. There are really three tenets here that we're going to talk through, and then I'm going to pass over to Alex. We really need to centralize supporter data using tools like NGP Van. Those allow you to build and create meaningful relationships at scale, so you can run effective supporter-based and volunteer-based programs. You really need to do three things to make those meaningful relationships and demonstrate to your supporters that you care about them, that allows you to leverage them up the ladder of engagement. You need to start by tracking those relationships and tracking those data points. Using those data points, and you need to recruit and engage people. And then to grow that, you need to report on it and scale over time. So those are our three tenets. And then I will pass it over to Alex to take it from here.
Yeah, so the first tenet we'll go through is the tracking piece. So if we go to the next slide. So and we dropped this into the chat again, but who's familiar with like NGP van tools and features, different ways in which you can engage supporters, volunteers, or even voters?
Maybe we'll do it like on a scale of 1 to 10. How familiar are you with different tools and features? How about that? Just drop it in the chat.
Somewhat.
Oh.
3, 6, 3, 2. Perfect. Great. Okay, this is very helpful. 5, 6, 8, 3. Awesome. Okay, great. So the first way that we're going to go through on how to track or keep track of data points for your supporters and volunteers is, and if we can go to the next slide when we get a second, is using, I think, yeah, we go. So the first one is survey questions versus activist codes. So I think of these two as sort of the primary way in NGP van that you use to track data from your supporters and volunteers. The difference between them, they're very similar, but activist codes are I think of activist codes as tools that you use to track categorical data where multiple responses can and should be expected out of the folks that you are trying to get data points from and trying to record data from. Survey questions, on the other hand, are used to track what I think of sequential data, or data where the most recent action is relevant. So to give you a bit more about those, or a couple examples, if we go to the next slide, in practice, activist codes can be things like donor. So you can tag somebody that is a donor and be able to pull a universe of folks that have donated based on that single tag. MA signups is Mobilize America. So if somebody signs up for an event online, you can tag them with an activist code so that you know that somebody signed up for an event via Mobilize America. If you are a C3 or a C4 or some other type of membership organization, you can keep track of different members using different activist codes. So one of my clients, it's a national women's advocacy organization. They are a C3 and a C4, and they have to keep track of their C4 members. And so we use an activist code that can be applied anytime that somebody takes a member affirming action to keep track of who the members are for that organization. A very common one that I'm sure folks have seen or used is issues. So whenever you go and talk to a voter or a volunteer and you ask them what are the issues that they care about, you can keep track of all the different issues that they find interesting that you can then use later on to engage with them in other conversations. If you're running any sort of ads campaigns, you can keep track of anyone that signs up via an online ad after seeing it on Facebook or on Google or wherever it may be. Keep track of those that came into your database via ads. And then the last piece is sourcing. So generally all of, when it comes to ads or even Mobilize America signups or donors, knowing where someone engaged with your campaign is super helpful and important when it comes to re-engaging them, which we'll talk about in a second. But knowing where they came from and how they found your campaign or your organization is super helpful and super valuable information that we tend to not keep track of. But I've done that in the past, and we'll go over a couple use cases where we've done this before. But keeping track of that sort of information at that granularity can make a huge difference when you're trying to re-engage your supporters. So those are activist codes. The next one is a survey question, which again is more of the sequential data. So here we can think of the one that I always like to talk about is merch. So if you have a store and you're selling shirts or mugs or stickers, anytime that somebody does that, you can upload that data into NGP van and have a survey question that says, this person bought a piece of merch, and then have the survey responses be the merch that they bought, so that in the future you can know within NGP van that somebody bought a shirt, that somebody bought a mug, or that they bought a sticker, and you can use that later on to try to re-engage them. So the idea here is that if you're calling someone, you can pick up the phone and say, hey, thanks for buying a shirt, will you volunteer, right? You try to acknowledge previous engagement in asking for like future actions. If you're running a blast SMS campaign, you can keep track of who is subscribed to your SMS program. If you're running a voter contact program, you can keep track of how somebody intends to vote. So, are they planning to vote in person? Are they doing it by mail? Are they doing it early? You can use a survey question to keep track of that information. Another very common one is supporter IDs. So do they support you? Yes or no? Do they support your opponent? Yes or no? You might recognize this from the 1 to 5 scale, where 1 is a strong supporter, 2 is a lean supporter, 3 is an undecided, and then 4 is a lean supporting your opponent, and then 5 is your strong opponent. Another one you can do is a volunteer ask. So when you ask someone, do they want to volunteer? They may say yes, they may say no, they may say later. So keeping track of later, would be helpful. 2 months from now, when you're trying to build for an event, you can go back to the later and say, hey, you said you'd be interested in volunteering. Now is the time to do that. You should do that now. And another one that I've done in the past is event interest. So if you're doing a series of events and they can't attend the first one, but they can attend subsequent ones, you can keep track of which event they said they would want to attend so that you can follow up with them later down the line. So again, these are just a few examples of how you can use survey questions to keep track of, or I guess activist codes and survey questions to keep track of the data that you are generating that you can use later down the line to re-engage your supporters.
I think one of the things you mentioned, Alex, which I like, is kind of the granularity of this and the granularity of tagging, whether it is activist codes or how you tag survey questions and then later on potentially automate on that. And also something Sean said too about moving people around the ladder of engagement, whether you're a nonprofit or a PAC or even a campaign. We used to kind of have this idea, like, if we have someone who just attends an event, let's get them to attend another event. Let's get them to then, host an event and maybe become a super volunteer. Or if they donate once, let's try to get them to, donate multiple times or be a recurring donor. And I think now people are coming in at all different stages or rungs of that ladder, and they're moving to different rungs, right? Like you might get a donor who doesn't want to be more than a donor, but you might get a volunteer who becomes a donor. You might get a donor who becomes a volunteer. And those are the only two things that they do. And I think having this kind of granularity lets you be really segmented with your campaigns and with your audience. And I think one of the cool things about NGP Van is that you can automate on all this, right? Like if Bill asked, as you were talking about survey questions, whether you were using or working within My Voters or My Campaign. One of the cool things that you can do with the tool is, say you create a survey question and you attach an activist code to that, right? And you're out in the field and you get an ID from someone, and then you have a follow-up question in your surveys that are, hey, do you want to put a yard sign in your yard, right? When you check yes on that, it automatically syncs back and attaches an activist code. You can then automatically fire off. This will be done again through automations. You could fire off a text message through NGP, right? That contact will be moved over. Their information will be moved over, and you could fire off an email series, or you could fire off a text message, which gives them information about where to pick up a sign, that kind of thing, as you're literally, out in the field with minivans. So that granularity, I think, we don't cite any research here, but we know both through research and anecdotally, when you get more granular with your segmentation, you get a much higher response, which of course then engenders better engagement down the road with your volunteers and supporters. So, cool.
I think the other piece I'd add there too is that when we talk about engaging voters and volunteers where they are, I think that is sort of applicable here too, right? Going back to the granularity component, if you know that somebody has done something, acknowledging that or bringing that up again is helpful, is going to have a more personal conversation with the person that you are engaging. So, that leads to this other piece where there's other ways to track data in NGP Van. Again, I mentioned that I think of activist codes and survey questions as the primary way to do it, but you have these other ways in which you can do it. This is just a sampling. There's many other ways that you can do this within NGP Van, but another big one is contact types. So whenever you go and you talk to someone, whether it's a voter or a volunteer, and you have a conversation with them, there is a way that you can keep track of how you contacted that person. That's what the contact type is. So for example, if you call someone, the contact type would be phone. If you canvass someone, the contact type would be walk. If you text someone, it would be SMS. These are very customizable, and within your own database, you should be able to edit these, though there is some nuance there depending on who the administrator of your NGP van instance is. But generally, you have a bunch of different options that you can choose from. One of the ones that I like to use, again, is the digital ad. So anytime that, again, this organization that I'm working with, they are running an ads program to try to identify more supporters and volunteer leads. We've been loading all of those ads leads, the folks that have signed up, via their digital ads back into NGP Van. We've tagged them as having been contacted by a digital ad, and then we can use that when we look at conversion rates, which we'll talk about, later in this presentation. But contact types are very, very helpful in trying to keep track of how it is that you reached someone and how you had a conversation with them or how you attempted to have a conversation with them. Another one is event types. So whenever you go and set up an event in NGP Van, you can say that it is a phone banking event, a canvassing event. It is a community event. You can say that it's a training. Basically, that just allows you to keep track of what are the types of events that volunteers or supporters are attending. Again, we'll talk about this later down the road, but this can be helpful in trying to figure out what is working and what isn't working. Another one that is very helpful that we used in Iowa in 2019 is the relationships function. Basically, this allows you to say that if you have two records within the database, you can say that they are related. There's a bunch of different options that you can select to choose what kind of relationship they have. But, for example, if me and Sean are in your database and you know that we are coworkers, you can map a relationship between me and Sean and say that we are coworkers. So when you're thinking about some degree of relational programming, you can use that information for those purposes. And then the last one that is also not very well known, but I actually really love, is the campaigns and contents feature, which basically allows you, whenever you create a script in NGP Van for a phone bank, you can attach what's called a campaign to it that basically says this campaign is a volunteer recruitment campaign, or it is a voter contact campaign. And so what that lets you do is you can say, it is helpful to know that you phone banked someone, that you called them, but it is more helpful to know that the conversation or that the call was about a volunteer recruitment ask, or that it was a voter contact ask, or that you were asking them, what their plan to GOTV was, and those sorts of things. Keeping track of that granularity is super, super helpful. And these are things that are built into NGP Van. There's nothing that you have to do additional to set this up. It's just a matter of knowing where to go in the platform, what to look for, and how to configure it correctly so you can keep track of this data.
If you're someone who reports up, whether it's to an exec director, a campaign manager, a director, that kind of thing, this is all great information, right? If you're getting real granular again, and you're tracking which methods and which channels are driving the most engagement, whether you're, like Alex said, doing a campaign, it might be voter ID or supporter ID, or you might be doing a completely separate outreach campaign. Understanding which one is driving the engagement and being able to test that. And as we get further on in the campaign, we all know that, generally speaking, resources start to get tighter and tighter, and especially on time, right? Our time gets tight as we get closer to elections or the end of campaigns. So knowing where we want to put our future resources or our remaining resources, we want to dump those into the channels that are most effective. So having this kind of information is key with that.
Cool. So that is it on the tracking section. I'll kick it back to Sean, who will go through recruitment and engagement.
Thanks, Alex. Really appreciate it. And I think just to put a finer point on it, really to recruit and engage effectively and move people up the ladder of engagement. If I am just a precinct captain in my precinct, or maybe I run a small local club and caucus in my town, I have maybe 12 members. I can remember those 12 members. I can remember all of the interactions that I've had with them. That's no problem. When I'm running a program at scale with hundreds of supporters, thousands of supporters, tens of thousands of supporters, right? I need to be able to demonstrate to those supporters that I care about them, that to move them and cause them to be more engaged with my organization. I need to demonstrate that I know about them and that I care about their interactions with the organization. I can't do that at scale without tracking all of these pieces of data. This is something I've said probably once a month for the last 10 years, but we like to say in campaigns, or at least I like to say as an organizer, right, that people come for the candidate, but they stay for you. You have to use data to leverage that you understand about your supporters. So I want to talk a little bit about how you actually are going to use that data. So you've aggregated all this data that Alex talked about. We know, if you've engaged with an ad, potentially, we know if you've said you wanted to volunteer, maybe we know that you've purchased a piece of merchandise or you've come to a rally. We've aggregated a really good profile of your engagement and your interest in our organization. Let's talk about some practical ways in NGP Van to use that. So there's my favorite tool in NGP Van is create a list. Many of you are probably familiar with this. Based on all those different activist codes, those survey questions, event history, I can create a list of people who match a certain set of criteria so that I am pulling people who said yes, that they want to volunteer and came to the most recent rally, so that I can say that at the top of my conversation. I can pull that information and I can save that list also if I want to use it in the future. Now, once I have that list pulled, there are many ways that I can use to engage those people, right? I can send that list to a virtual phone bank so that it makes it really easy for me to quickly call through those 20 or 50 or 100 people, however it may be. If I'm canvassing, I might want to send that to Minivan so that I can have that right there on my phone and I can go knock doors using my phone. There are other third-party tools that you might want to use to engage supporters. SMS is one of them. There are some great tools that have van integrations with their SMS tools, so you can text those supporters. There are a number of different ways that you can tactically implement those lists. If we want to go to the next slide, I think no matter how you are trying to engage those people tactically, right, whether it's on the doors, whether it's a phone call, whether it's an email, all that outbound messaging needs to adhere to some basic principles. Remember that the most important thing here is that we are creating a relationship with the supporter and that we're deepening that relationship on every single contact that we have. So you always want to acknowledge past engagement with a supporter. Hey, Barbara, thanks so much for coming to the rally, yesterday or whatever day it was. You also want to connect on mutual values, right? We are here and part of this organization because we believe the same things. We believe in abortion rights. We believe that you should have access to education no matter your zip code, that if you work 40 hours a week, you should be able to make a living wage and get by and support your family, right? We have all these different values and we want to remind our supporters that we share about them. And right, that's also the trigger to remind them that's why I need to be involved because I have values that I care about. And you as an organizer who's leveraging this data are providing a vehicle for people to actually advocate for themselves and advocate for those values. You also want to have two-way conversations. Even if it is a text message, even if it is an email where it's harder to have dialogue, you want to create ways to have dialogue. You always want to demonstrate that you're listening. I don't want to just talk at Barbara, who came to the rally yesterday, who cares about abortion rights, and then say, will you come do something for me? You want to listen to them. You want to create opportunities for back and forth so that, right, this is a real conversation and that Barbara feels like she wants to be part of the organization and feels like I care about her. But every good organizer will end a conversation or will somewhere integrate into their conversation and ask. You should always have some sort of an ask, whether it is a small ask, whether that it is, a really high bar ask. Maybe you have a couple of different asks depending on what feels appropriate in that conversation. You want to have an ask because if you don't end a conversation with an ask, you aren't moving that relationship anywhere. You've just been talking to Barbara about the rally that she was at, about why abortion rights are important, and she totally agrees. And then you just wasted 5 minutes of your time and 5 minutes of her time if you didn't say, will you come to the phone bank on Thursday, or will you pitch in $25? Whatever it is, you have to end your conversation or integrate into your conversation and ask that will move the relationship down the field. I think it's also really important to understand the size of your organization and that you need to adapt your engagement strategy based on the scale of your organization. You need to adhere to all the principles that I talked about, but if you are a 3-person nonprofit and have, you have a development director, maybe you have an executive director, maybe you have, I don't know, a communications director, what have you, you don't have the ability in that sort of organization probably to call every single supporter who pitched in $15 or who signed a petition to say, yes, that they support increasing minimum wage. You need to come up with some different strategies to engage those people. If you're a large organization, say, a full-fledged presidential campaign, you have 300 organizers on the ground in Virginia, you have the ability to call every single person who goes to your website and indicates that they want to volunteer, who goes to a rally. You have the ability to follow up with them individually over text or over a phone call, right? So, in a smaller organization, just think about what that is. Maybe you build out some simple automated email flows. So when someone signs up to volunteer or pitches in $5, you have an email flow that says, thank you so much for doing what you did. We really appreciate it. Here's how you can, be involved, so that even if you aren't able to call that person, you can still say thank you, and you can still indicate how they can escalate their engagement with you. And then there are a couple of systems that every organization, whether you are a county party, whether you are a PAC, whatever sort of organization you are, to deepen supporter relationships, there are a couple of systems that I wholeheartedly believe in and think that everyone needs. You need to have a system to reach out to your hot leads. And what do I mean by hot leads? So when someone goes to your website and says, yeah, I'm interested in getting involved, or yes, I care about Pete Buttigieg, or yes, I care about Bernie Sanders, you have a very small window that there's something that happened that person that led that person to say, I want to be involved. And you have maybe 72 hours to reach out to that person and say, take the next step. So you need to have systems in place to engage what I call a hot lead. You also need to thank your supporters. Anytime someone takes an action, anytime someone donates, no matter how big or how small, you need to say thank you for doing what they did. It doesn't, again, matter how big or how small it is. It shows that you care about that person, and it gives you a point to follow up with that person. So really 2 important things right there. And one, supporter maintenance is really important. So when I talk about supporter maintenance, what I mean is that, right, everything that we're talking about is about developing relationships, and it's about deepening relationships and demonstrating that you care. You can't go on and on and on every single day with, just escalating someone up the ladder of engagement, saying, okay, yesterday you gave $10, today I'm asking you to give $25. Someone's going to get really tired, and it will feel inauthentic. You need to have a system to keep up with your supporters, to ask them how they're doing, to understand what's going on in their lives, to make sure that you have the context for what's going on with them so that they stay engaged and that you demonstrate that you care with them. And then a last system that I think is really important are volunteer confirmations. Remind your supporters that they made a commitment to come to an event or to sign a letter to the editor, whatever it is. We need to remind people that they made a commitment when they signed up to do that. Otherwise, if you don't remind someone that they signed up for the phone bank that's coming up tomorrow, and that you're expecting them to be there, they likely actually will not show up. So it's really important that you have that system in place. I think we can go to the next slide.
Yeah, I just wanted to drop on top of what you said, Sean, particularly about the systems. I think, we look at a lot of the big campaigns, some of which you have pictured up here, right? And it's like what you said before, you might have 300 people on the ground and you could cover absolutely everybody who reaches out. And on smaller campaigns, you could do that because there's only a few supporters, and then you get lost in the middle, right? With the upper state ledge, sometimes a little tough. Maybe you don't have the budget that you need to do, or you think you need to do that stuff. I dropped it in the chat, but it's really important where the systems come in here, like Sean is talking about. If you take a little bit of prep time and a little bit of planning up front, and you think about the ladder of engagement, you think about what you want people to do, and you just put really simple emails together, a couple text messages, things like that, all the stuff that Sean and Alex have listed here about moving leads through your system, like your volunteers, thanking your supporters, whatever that may be, whether it's an event, a donation, even attendance at an event or attendance in some volunteer capacity, you will find that your engagement goes up. We have a blog post somewhere on the site, and I'll see if I could find it and include it in the follow-up email. But the lift that you get and the increased engagement you get just from thanking your supporters, not even donors. Obviously, you want to thank your donors, but just thanking supporters for attending, you get a lift in follow-up engagement. I'll grab that article and try to share it out in the follow-up, but it's not hard to do. It just takes time and it's work. But if you plan it and you do it early and you put it in place as people go through your website and go through all of your planning, even in person type stuff, and like Alex and Sean are saying, you get it into the system, you could automate on that and have that work magnify the work of your staff. Even if you only have a couple staff members, using the system in this way with the systems that Sean is talking about helps you magnify your staff work.
Yeah, the technology that we have and the tools that NGP Van provides, to your point, Craig, no matter how big or small your organization is, you have the ability to implement all of those things using NGP Van, and I think that's really great and exciting. And anyways, I'm going to pass it back to Alex to discuss how to report and scale on these things.
Yeah, so I think generally, so the progression here, right, is that we've talked about tracking. So we have all of our data tracked in NGP Van. We've then gone out and engaged our supporters, but now we're going to talk about reporting. Maybe the chat real quick, anybody know what is reporting or why we should be doing it? We're going to talk about this anyway, but I just want to see what folks say about this. We can take a few seconds here.
Yeah, just drop in the chat what reporting means to you, right? Like what is reporting? When you think of reporting, when someone asks you to drop a report, or even what are some of the things that you like to report on, as you're working on campaigns or whatever it is you're doing, whether it's an electoral campaign or non-electoral, what reports have you been asked to provide? What reports have been really helpful for you? That kind of thing. Davis is going to get a gold star for sharing today, for sure. I don't know if Zoom can do virtual gold stars. Can we do that? Reactions, maybe? I don't know.
Yeah, so if we can see, so we can see if what we're doing is working, where we are, what we've done. Finance filings definitely count there. Are you close to your win number? A gold star? Yes, all of the above. Okay, so yeah. So I pulled two definitions of reporting, one from the dictionary that I got from Google, and then another one that I sort of made up, but also pulled from a former coworker. The dictionary definition is of what a report is a spoken or written account of something that has been observed, heard, done, or investigated. Sometimes I read definitions from the dictionary and I don't know what they mean. So to put that in other words, we basically, when you're reporting, you're basically manipulating raw data to help understand performance toward key metrics and to tell a visual story about your program. So a lot of the times we'll see reports and they're like, these beautiful graphs and charts and all these different things that you can visually see about, how your program is progressing or how many donors you have engaged and all that sort of stuff. So that is what we talk about when we say reporting. The goals of your report should be One is basically just to arm stakeholders with information that can help drive change, make decisions, and understand what is happening. If you're building out a program, those are things that you need to be able to know in order to decide whether or not the program is functioning the way that you expected it to, and whether you need to make any decisions to pivot or make adjustments to it in order to reach the goals that you had previously set. The second goal, similar, is, again, you want to inform program managers or program implementers of the progress, the effectiveness, or the areas for improvement. So if you're an organizer and your regional organizing director has told you that you need to hit X number of calls per week, you need a report to tell you whether you are on track to hit that number of calls every single week, and whether there's any adjustments that need to be done in order to help you reach that goal. And then lastly, reports don't have to be complicated. They should be simple. They should not be complex, and they should not require regular training or documentation. If you are building something, or if you're making a report that you have to explain to your executive director, your campaign manager every single time you to them, that is way too complicated, and the report should literally just speak for itself. So going to the next slide, thinking back to the data sources that we had access to, we already tracked our ads leads, our survey question responses, the contact attempts and the contact types, the different activist codes that we're tracking, whether someone has attended an event or not, if they have filled out a specific form that you put on your website. All of that data is now tracked, and we can use all this information to build a report to track, are we generating the number of ad leads that we wanted to, that we had a goal to reach? Are we getting the total number of survey responses that we wanted to reach in order to talk to the number of voters that is going to get us to our win number? What does our contacts look like? What's our contact rate look like? Are we getting better contacts on Fridays or on Saturdays or on Sundays, in the evenings or in the mornings? That is all information that you can derive from having put all of the data in NGP Van and then running reports against that to try to answer some of those questions, try to optimize your program so that you can scale it, so you can talk to more voters, engage more supporters, engage more volunteers. Same thing with event attendance, knowing what events people are attending, which ones they are engaging with. I'm sure Craig spends a lot of time looking at this webinar engagement data to see what types of webinars folks attend, and which ones they come to and which ones they don't, and all that sort of stuff. And the cool thing is that you can do all of this within NGP Van. So if we go to the next slide, let's have 3 hypothetical campaign goals. The first one being to contact 300 new voters in your district every 2 weeks. Within NGP Van, you can use the Canvas results and survey response report to track conversations and voter IDs, or for vote methods. So you can use existing reports within NGP Van that looks at Canvas results and survey question responses to sort of answer those questions, to say, am I getting close to contacting the 300 voters that I set myself a goal for of contacting every 2 weeks? Let's say that you want to engage 5 new volunteers every 15 days. You can use the event participant report to see who is attending the events, what types of events they are attending, and how frequently they do that. You can see how many unique volunteers you have versus recurring volunteers to see if you're growing your volunteer base or if you have the same people coming to the same events week over week. Or let's say that you want to grow your donor base by 25 donors every month. You can use the contribution report to track the total number of contributors and what forms they are donating from. So if you have a form that is, for some reason, bringing in more money than another form, maybe there's something about that form that is working that you can implement in other places to try to upsell or make more value out of your online donors. So again, these are all things that exist within NGP Van. They are built in, they are there and available and accessible, just like all the automations that Sean was talking about. So, again, it just takes a little bit of time to set it all up, but once you have it set up, you can get it going. And the other cool thing too is that a lot of these reports can be automated. So you can set up a schedule for these reports to be emailed to you at whatever regular cadence you want. And so you don't even have to log into NGP Van to sort of see the results of these reports. They can be emailed to you, or they can be emailed to your executive director or your campaign manager. And if you want to get crazy with it, you can also set up some like automations to like automatically put it into a Google sheet that then does like a, wider report or a, crazy thing. But again, that's getting a little bit more complex and a little bit crazy. But the possibilities here are pretty endless by just using tools that already exist that don't cost additional money, but will help you scale your program by tracking your progress, and then building from there to optimize for the things that are working.
For what it's worth, we do webinars Tuesday at noon because we get 100% higher participation and registration and attendance. The second one is Thursday at noon. I think it's the lunch hour that allows people to attend. So we try to do Tuesdays and Thursdays, which are higher engagement.
Good insights. So the other thing to remember here is that, again, you're not always going to hit your goals on the first try. You're going to set a goal and either you're going to overshoot or you're going to undershoot it. It just kind of depends. Ultimately, what you want to have is something to strive for, something to aim toward. If you set a goal that's way too high, readjust it. Look at your program, see what is possible. Don't set it too low so that it's easy to hit, but set it to something that's a little bit more comfortable and a little bit more manageable to hit. If you set your goal a little too low, set it a little bit higher. Challenge yourself to get a little bit more, to talk to more voters, to get more volunteers. Again, it's okay to not hit the goal. Ultimately, what we want to do here is have systems to track your progress so that you can scale your organization and you scale your program and you can optimize for the things that do work. Once you figure out whether you are able to hit the goals that you set for yourself, you can then again adjust your program and reset the expectations. If you told your campaign manager, I think I can get 300 new volunteers every single week, but it turns out that you can only get 100, you can reset that expectation and say, hey, like things are harder than we thought. We can't get 300 volunteers every week, but we can get 100. And that's a goal that we're going to stick ourselves to. And we have this amount of data that shows that we can actually get to that goal. And we're going to work really, really hard to get to that new goal.
I think this is also important here. When you go back to your activist codes, when you go back to your survey IDs or your survey questions and you look at that, this is where it helps you kind of assess these goals, right? Because if you say, just like you were talking about here, Alex, hey, we have a goal to hit 300 new IDs this week, and you only hit 100, excuse me, you could then look at your activist codes, you could look at your other activity and say, well, normally we would send 10 emails, but we only sent 2 emails this week. So did we just not do the work? Or normally we would phone bank, we would have 15 volunteers phone banking, and this week we only had 3. So maybe it wasn't a bad goal, we just didn't work hard enough. And then we know for the next week what we need to change. You might also say, well, our goal was to hit 500, we only did 200, and we did twice as much work as normal. Then you could say, well, hey, maybe that's an unrealistic goal. Now, if that goal is part of your win number, you might want to start looking at your win number and some of the things you're doing to hit those numbers. That might be an indicator that maybe the campaign's not going so well. So, this is why it's really important to do that planning work with your numbers and your goals, so that when you do the reporting and you look back, you can have a conversation, and an honest conversation about that progress.
And I'll just kick it back to Sean, who I think is going to kick it back to me.
Yeah. So Alex and I wanted to talk through two just real world examples about how you can put all of these pieces together, the tracking, the engaging, the reporting and scaling, into two case studies that we both have worked on and implemented. So I'm going to pass it back to Alex to talk about hot leads.
Yeah, so when I was in Iowa in 2019 for the caucus on Elizabeth Warren's presidential campaign, we built out a system that basically sent organizers their hot leads. And we had sourcing information that told them if the person was a hot lead because they bought a shirt, because they signed an online form, or because they told us that they were going to support Elizabeth Warren at the caucus. If they, once Elizabeth Warren had one of her many plans be rolled out, they filled out an online form that said that that they supported the multi-millionaire, I forgot what it was called now, it was the ultra millionaires tax I can't remember. This is so embarrassing. I forgot what the plan was called. But anyway, we would tell our organizers where the volunteer or where the hot lead had come from. And so when the organizers would make the phone calls, they would say, "Hey, thanks for buying a mug. We have this event next week. Can you please come, and join us for this canvassing event or for this phone banking event?" And so we tracked all that information in NGP Van. We knew that they were a hot lead, that they were sent to an organizer on a specific day, that they were contacted at a specific time. And then because we had all the sourcing information, we were able to work with our paid media team to adjust our paid media strategy so that we were getting volunteers from the sources that were generating the most quality or the higher quality volunteer leads. So our paid media team was running acquisition campaigns in order to generate more volunteer leads. We were tracking the sourcing based on where the lead came from, and then the conversations that our organizers were having with those folks, and then whether or not those folks attended the events we wanted them to attend. So once we had enough data, we could say, okay, we're seeing that volunteer leads that are coming from these specific sources are not generating volunteers that end up coming to the events. So we should shift our paid media strategy to put more money in the sources that are generating volunteer leads. And so we were able to expand our volunteer base leading up to the caucus by doing that, by tracking all that information, by tracking the sourcing, and by looking at the conversion rates between the sourcing or the point of entry for a potential volunteer and their progression through the ladder of engagement that Sean was talking about at the very beginning. So case study number 1.
Awesome. Thanks, Alex. I'm briefly going to talk about our second case study before we open it up for a couple of questions. But I want to talk about not a volunteer application, but a voter application. A lot of folks here, maybe over the last couple of years, have heard about ballot curing. What ballot curing is there are, let's say, 0.5% of voters have their ballots maybe rejected. Maybe you voted provisionally. Maybe when you send your mail ballot back, the signature that you put on your ballot did not match the one on file. Therefore, your ballot has not yet been counted, and you have to do something to make it be counted in the election. Now, it's a lot of work to, get 0.5% of voters to make sure that their ballots are counted. But in really close elections, it really, really matters. Case in point, Catherine Cortez Masto won her re-election to the United States Senate by 8,000 votes. In Nevada last cycle, the program that I ran cured 7,000 ballots. That means that almost the entire margin of her victory was because we cured enough ballots of our supporters to make sure that they were counted and that we were able to send Catherine back to the United States Senate. It started by tracking, right? We get data back from county clerks, county registrars to say, here are all the people whose ballots have been rejected. We are able to take that information and match it back to the voter file, which is the kind of big database of voters that is publicly available and anyone can access through a county registrar or secretary of state. And then we were able to, from that list, identify people who were our supporters. We were able to do this really early on and to do some basic testing. And what we were able to find by tracking and engaging our supporters is that half of the people whose ballots needed to be cured didn't have phone numbers, so we could only reach them really over the door. And we were able to test a couple of different types of scripts to see what made people, because this is a new issue that a lot of voters have never heard about before, let alone in many cases they were hearing from the campaign first, not from the government, not from a county registrar. So they were really skeptical. So we were able to test different scripts using campaigns in the way Alex talked about earlier to identify which conversations led most to someone saying that they were going to cure their ballot. Then so over time, we were able to see that, okay, this script that shares a copy of the letter that they should be getting from the registrar registrar builds enough confidence in the voter to say that they are able to cure their script. Therefore, we are going to print off 10, actually it's probably more like 100,000 copies of this letter that people are getting from the registrar that we're going to flyer at people's homes 4 times a day to let them know that they need to cure their ballot. And then they're going to tell us that they cured their ballot. We learned over time then, and we're able to see when people no longer we got a rejection file every single day from the county registrar to say that here are the people who still need to cure their ballot. So we were able to see over time who the people were who cured their ballot and what was successful in moving them up that ladder of engagement to cure their ballot. And again, that was something that we had to do really quickly, and it relied on a lot of data and moving that and scaling that very quickly. It may seem like a lot of work to put these systems in place to track all of this data, to engage on that data, to report and create some feedback to adjust programs. But these systems can have tremendous impact and incredible outcomes. If we didn't do that, there's a great case to be made that Catherine would have gone through a recount and litigation on her reelection, and Democrats' majority in the United States Senate would have been in jeopardy. And so, if you can hone these systems and perfect these systems, like I said, they can really pay off for your organizations. But thank you. We want to kick it to questions.
Yeah, and I just want to tag on top of what Sean said before the webinar kicked up and we started. Sean, Alex, and I were chatting, and I worked on a campaign in 2020 at the state Senate level in a somewhat rural area, and we had a couple hundred votes that the election came down to, and we had a contested election, and it did go to a recount. And on top of the recount, we also had a lot of judicial challenges. And we had gotten to the point where there were a couple hundred ballots that needed to be cured, some of which were provisional ballots, some of which were mail ballots. There were questions as to the legality of them. And we did the same thing that you did, Sean. We put them into a vote builder campaign, and we matched them up with the voter file, found a lot of them in very rural areas. And we had volunteers show up on their door to explain to them what the process was going to be. And it built that understanding that when they eventually were contacted by the county, and it wasn't a farce, right? There was so much going on about, hey, is this a real call? Is this a real county elections person? Is it a real campaign person? I'm just going to forget it and not get involved. In Sean's case, it sounds like it was a couple thousand votes, which is a slim margin for a congressional race. In our case, it was a margin of 69 votes was the official for this state Senate race. So in either one of those cases, if you don't do that campaign, putting that back in vote builder and doing that outreach using the data, it's possible that those people don't win. And that could change the composition, like you said, of the Senate, of a state Senate, flipping a house or not flipping a house. It can be a huge difference. Cool. We got about 5 minutes left, 4 minutes left. Open it up for any additional questions. We had a couple that I answered in the Q&A related to automations. I'll include some resources to the NGP van training, the help and support documents related to automations. A few people also requested a separate webinar just on automations. You'll notice in this webinar, it's very, we didn't go through a lot of the actual click here, do this in NGP van. This is more best practices from our experience on campaigns, what we know works. So what we might do in the future is just do a webinar on how do you do those automations? How do you set them up? Like a very practical webinar. So I'll get that set up and share that out with everybody. And then there's a couple other resources that I'll put in the email that goes out as a follow-up. But, for the next couple of minutes, if you have additional questions, pop them here in the Q&A, or, we got another one in the automation webinar. Okay, great. Perfect. Any other questions? Anything else that, maybe you thought we would cover, but maybe we didn't or didn't have a chance to cover that we could put in the follow-ups here, or even do another webinar on? If there's something that we missed or that you hoped we'd covered, drop it here in the chat and we'll make sure to get it covered. Can everyone still hear us? Cool. Okay. I guess we covered everything then. Big thank you to Sean and Alex. Thank you for all this great information. Really appreciate it. Oh, we're getting mining personal data like political sign and how to use minivan. How to use minivan. Okay, great. We actually do have one planned for how to use minivan. That one will be coming up a little bit later in the cycle, but we'll get that out to everybody. Everybody on here will be included on our future notifications for webinars. And then I wanted to just pop up a real quick poll. We've got a lot of information here from Sean and Alex. So what we do want to ask is, both Sean and Alex work as consultants, and they help our organizations, campaigns, committees, PACs, organize their data. They help them work on campaigns. If you would like to hear more from them, or if you'd like or are interested in having them give you a shout to learn more about some of the things that you saw today, just click that little yes button. And this is our way to make sure that people don't get spammed. We want to make sure that, if you're interested in hearing more from them or learning more from Sean and Alex, that they can contact you directly. We'll make sure they get your information. That way we're not just spamming the entire list of people who don't want to hear from certain people. Again, we like to make these very best practices and, less about selling and, hey, just go and use the tools, and more about how do we do this on real campaigns? How is it effective? What are organizers really doing on the ground? How do we use these tools that we have to be more effective? So Tom made a note. I'd like to hear more about running a relational org program. Great question, Tom. One, we did a webinar with a group called Tectonica about relational organizing. Two, we put out a guide. It's like 60 pages long on relational organizing. So I'll put those into the resources. Three, I don't know, well, maybe the people from Texas know, there was a candidate for Congress in 2020. His name was Sri, and he ran for Congress. Unfortunately, he lost, but we had some really great relational organizing campaigns, and Sri has been working with the Texas Dems and a few other groups to do relational organizing, not only in Texas, but all over the Southwest. We're going to bring him on to talk about his version and his form of relational organizing. That will probably be sometime in September. So we're going to do a webinar just with that. I'll include some information about that too. So cool. Great. Well, thank you again, Sean and Alex. Really appreciate your time and your expertise here. And we'll follow up in the next day or so with the follow-up email, deck, and links. And have a great week, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.